Everyone knows. Oliver cares about me a lot. He did it for me. He would rather give up a high-paying job abroad and start over back home. But later, I heard him say to someone else, "Wait until she gets better. Then I will marry her, but I actually have no illness at all. So, who exactly is she?" I suddenly smashed the glass on the table. I cut my arm with the shards. Then I pointed at the lipstick mark on Oliver's mouth and questioned him. "Oliver, you tell me, who is that woman?" Oliver stepped closer, trying to take the shard from my hand. He said, "This was done before you fainted." "Sophie, calm down for a moment. Let's talk this through." As I spoke, I backed away, but I couldn't help but say hurtful things. "Oliver, your actions are truly unbearable." Oliver was momentarily stunned. His eyes were red. He looked at me in disbelief, but seeing him like that made me feel particularly annoyed. I felt especially irritated inside. Oliver kept repeating that he didn't. It was almost unbearable for my ears. I raised my hand and pointed outside the door. I said in a cold tone, "Oliver, why don't you just disappear?" Oliver called me with a choked voice. I didn't respond. I went straight into the room. I sat on the bed. I thought he would come in to comfort me as usual, but I waited for a long time. All I heard was a soft sound of the door closing. I looked up in surprise. I rushed out without even putting on my slippers, but it was empty there. The things I had thrown on the floor were all cleaned up. Only a note written by Oliver was left on the table. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I'm feeling a bit sad right now. Wait for me to come back later and comfort you." I was so angry that I tore the note to shreds. In a fit of rage, I deleted Oliver's phone number. Then I sat down on the ground. I hugged my head and cried helplessly. After a while, my phone suddenly rang. I looked at my phone. It was a call from Oliver. I hung up immediately. He called again. I hung up again. It took me several tries before I finally answered the call. Just as I said a few words, I heard a very formal voice interrupt me. "Hello, are you a relative of Mr. Oliver? Mr. Oliver has been in a car accident. Please come to the City People's Hospital immediately." Upon hearing this news, I suddenly felt cold all over until I arrived at the hospital. I still found it hard to believe this was real. Oliver's dad and mom hurried to the hospital. All I saw was the surgery room lights still on. I tightly covered my mouth. My footsteps felt unsteady as I tried to reach the door of the operating room. Suddenly, everything went dark. I fainted. When I woke up again, I found myself lying on a hospital bed. My mom was sitting by the bed, silently crying. After I woke up, she hurried over to ask how I was feeling. I shook my head. I softly told her I had dodged it in time. I wasn't hit by the car, but I noticed a look of surprise on my mom's face. At that moment, I heard someone calling me from behind. Only then did I realize there was someone next to me with an arm in a cast. He turned to look at me. He quickly stood up and cautiously asked if I wanted some water. I frowned. I asked, "Who are you?" The person showed a hint of confusion and helplessness in his eyes. I didn't want to waste any more time, but he was pulling the doctor and shouting. His voice was hoarse. I asked the doctor if I had amnesia. The doctor had no way to tell. He had to give me a thorough examination. Then I told him I was fine. I had no other symptoms. The fainting before was just due to insufficient blood supply to the brain. I impatiently pulled out the needle. I staggered out of the hospital. That person hurried to catch up with me. He asked if I was still angry and ignoring him. I just felt annoyed. I turned around and pushed him away. A big man. Just like that, he was pushed to the ground by me. People around looked over. I frowned. I thought, could this person be trying to extort me? I took a few steps back. I said coldly, "This gentleman, I don't know you at all. If you keep this up, I will call the police." That person sat on the ground. He kept mumbling, "I'm Oliver, Sophie. Don't scare me." I frowned. I do have a friend named Oliver, but we are just neighbors, and I haven't seen him for a long time. I was just about to speak, when suddenly my head started to hurt badly. I don't know why. I instinctively didn't want to stay in the hospital. I turned and quickly walked out. I took a taxi back home. I casually tossed my keys aside. I collapsed onto the bed. It wasn't long before I fell asleep. Bang, don't go over there. I suddenly woke up from the dream. Cold sweat was streaming down my forehead. It dripped onto the white quilt. It soaked a patch. I was gasping for breath. My hands were gripping my hair tightly. Who was that shadow that got hit by the car in my dream? I turned to get some water. Suddenly, I noticed a note on the bedside table. It had a string of unfamiliar characters written on it. "Oliver, why did you disappear after the accident? I'm really worried about you. I tried calling you. You said you would arrive soon. Hurry up and come. I miss you a lot. I feel like my blood is flowing backward. My nails are digging deep into my palm for several consecutive days. I can find similar notes at home. Oliver, what are you doing? I haven't you come back yet? What surprised me was, the next day, Oliver appeared at my doorstep. He was holding flowers and gifts, standing outside, asking me to open the door. I hadn't seen him for a long time. I felt a bit hesitant inside. I didn't dare to open the door easily. There was no other way. I had to call the property management to have them take Oliver away. I looked at the unfamiliar number I had just dialed on my phone. My feelings were complicated. Oliver, today I made your favorite braised pork. Now I have to go out. Remember to eat when you get home. I looked at the plate of braised pork on the table, still steaming, so angry I couldn't take it anymore. I flipped the table over in a fit of rage. I spoke to Oliver. In a few days, it will be our 4-year anniversary. Don't forget. I stared at the room filled with flowers and balloons. I couldn't help but pout. I was determined to find out who could come and go freely in my house. I went to the community security room to check the surveillance footage, but I found that no one had entered or exited my house at all. I called a locksmith to change the lock, but there were still signs that someone had been in my home. I sprinkled glow powder on the floor. When I woke up, I found the floor had been cleaned spotless. I was taken aback. I didn't expect thieves to be so bold nowadays, to dare to brazenly break into someone else's home. I felt troubled. I decided to go out for a walk, to relax my mind. Before I knew it, I had walked to the riverbank, gazing at the surging river water. I can't help but recall the most difficult time in my life: failures at work, traitors among colleagues, mounting debts, and severe depression. Life back then was nothing but darkness for me. The rushing river was right in front of me. It seemed like my only escape. I lifted my foot, wanting to jump in. What happened next? I can't seem to remember. I squatted down. A bunch of unfamiliar images suddenly popped into my mind. There was a vague shadow walking hand in hand with me by the river. I looked up and smiled, asking him, by the way, why did you suddenly come back that day? The shadow gently pinched my nose. Smiling, he said, maybe it was telepathy. I leaned on his shoulder and suggested, then let's pick a day. You accompany me back to see my parents. Okay. I collapsed to the ground, feeling completely powerless. It took a long time for me to recover. I hurriedly walked back in a panic. As I passed by a hot pot restaurant, the owner greeted me warmly. I hadn't even had a chance to speak. She continued talking to herself. Your boyfriend has reserved a table for next Thursday. Is there something special happening that day? I didn't say anything. I just felt a chill all over my body. Next Thursday is the anniversary written on the note, but I don't know this owner at all. She acted as if she was very familiar with me. I politely declined the owner's invitation to come in. I walked home alone. I unknowingly stood in front of a handmade shop for a long time, gently touching the ring on my ring finger. The staff noticed my actions. She smiled and asked me, "What style do you want to make today?" I looked at her in confusion, but she seemed to misunderstand my meaning. She began enthusiastically introducing me to other types of handicrafts in her shop. The clerk congratulated me while speaking. She also exclaimed how lucky I was, because the material of this ring was only enough to make this pair. At that time, it was specially reserved by my husband over the phone, so she remembered it very clearly. But I felt like I had fallen into an ice cellar, because I didn't have a boyfriend at all. Thinking of this, I forcefully pulled the ring off my hand and threw it into the bushes. Ignoring the clerk's shouts, I went straight to the hospital. After the doctor gave me a thorough examination, he clearly told me I did not have any symptoms of amnesia. I breathed a sigh of relief and was even more certain that they had mistaken me for someone else. After thanking the doctor, I went home. At the door, I saw that guy who had been bothering me at the hospital again. He was sitting at my doorstep. When he saw me coming over, he quickly stood up, not knowing where to put his hands. In the end, he handed me a note. It's written on the note, "Oliver, if you don't come back soon, I'm really going to be angry." I let out a cold hum. I casually stuffed the note into Oliver's arms. Say it, this isn't what I wrote, to prove that Oliver indeed mistook someone. I specifically took him to confirm. Arriving at the hot pot restaurant entrance, the owner greeted Oliver warmly, asked if we wanted to change the reservation time. The staff at the handmade shop also smiled and handed me the ring I had previously thrown away to make sure I kept it well. Don't let down my husband's intentions, the staff said while pointing at Oliver next to me. I had no choice but to helplessly take the proud Oliver home. He sat quietly by the bed, his eyes sparkling. like a gentle big dog. I helplessly rubbed my forehead. I really don't. It's not, so it's not. Oliver suddenly interrupted me. His gaze carried a hint of pleading. He said softly, I have nowhere to go right now. Can you let me stay for a while? He looked at me for a long time without saying anything. He raised his arm and said, that day you were walking on the road, you almost got hit by a car. It was me who saved you. I recalled the vague figure from my dream. I couldn't help but nod. I agreed to Oliver's request. He moved into my house just like that. Since then, no new notes appeared in the house. I quietly breathed a sigh of relief. I thought Oliver's girlfriend had finally let go, no longer entangled. In the following days, I woke up every morning. When I walked into the living room, I could always see Oliver preparing breakfast. Suddenly, I seemed to see a similar scene that once existed in the house, but the person's face was unclear. He saw me come out. He smiled and said to me, little lazybug, go wash your hands and get ready to eat. I shook my head. I pushed that thought aside. After all, I've always lived alone. Later, we became more familiar with each other. I sat at the table. While eating breakfast, I joked, Oliver, didn't you often make breakfast for your girlfriend before? Oliver's hand paused for a moment. He looked up at me for a while. Only then did he confirm I wasn't joking. I just thought he was a bit strange. The atmosphere suddenly became very awkward. I really couldn't stand this situation. I quickly got dressed and hurriedly left. After that, Oliver started to chase after me. He knew I was tired from working overtime at the company. Every day he would prepare dinner and bring it to me. Then he would quietly wait for me to finish work and go home together. He understood all my preferences. Whenever I was in a bad mood, he always found various ways to make me happy, slowly helping me to get out of those troubles, especially during thunderstorms and rainy weather. I always toss and turn in bed out of fear. It's hard to fall asleep. Oliver moved a cushion to sit by the door and kept me company. He told me stories to cheer me up. He helped me fall asleep. I gradually immersed myself in it. I couldn't extricate myself. That day, I watched Oliver as he lowered his head to pick fish bones for me. I couldn't help but ask, Oliver, you've been living here for so long. What about your girlfriend? Oliver was taken aback for a moment. He just answered me in a low voice. I have already been forgotten by everyone. We will all embrace new lives. I felt a bit happy inside, but there was also an indescribable sense of loss. Oliver looked up. His gaze was fixed on me. My heart suddenly tightened. I thought he had finally discovered that I secretly liked him all this time. But after looking closely for a while, I realized he actually hadn't noticed anything at all. I let out a sigh of relief. I felt a bit lost inside. But there was also an indescribable sense of satisfaction that even I found a bit despicable. I took a half-month leave from the company. I stayed at home. Oliver seemed to have nothing to do either. He was hanging around me all day. Later, feeling bored at home, we decided to go out for a walk. The neon lights flickered at night. Snow was falling heavily. People hurriedly rushed home. Only Oliver and I walked leisurely side by side on the street. Today is Christmas. There was a sparkling Christmas tree at the store entrance. I ran over. I asked Oliver to take a photo of me. Snowflakes were falling gently. I opened my mouth to ask him, Oliver, do you have any wishes? Oliver looked at me with deep eyes. I heard him say, I hope for my Sophie. When he said, may everything go smoothly, my heart suddenly tightened. Uncontrollably, tears streamed down. I rushed over and tightly hugged Oliver. I leaned against his chest and said, I want to be with Oliver. I clearly felt Oliver's body suddenly stiffen. Then warm liquid dripped onto my face. It dampened a patch. He kissed my lips while crying. After Oliver pursued me for more than half a year, we officially confirmed our romantic relationship. My vacation is over. I returned to the company wearing high heels. The assistant was already anxiously waiting for me at my desk. She quickly placed a pile of documents in front of me. She said these were needed during my vacation. I need to handle this month's tasks quickly. Otherwise, it will be too late. I looked at her in confusion. During the time I was on leave, I was either with Oliver or resting at home. I slept for half a day straight. How could I have the heart to think about work? I reached out and touched the assistant's forehead. Emily, are you running a fever? When have I ever asked you for it? Emily pouted. She pulled out the WeChat records from her phone and handed it to me, saying, Sis, you're the one who's confused. My eyes widened in surprise. I quickly snatched Emily's phone, staring blankly at the conversation on the screen. That account clearly isn't mine, but the tone and symbols used in the messages are exactly the same as mine. I asked Emily who recommended this account to her. Emily looked at me in surprise. She said, "Sis, didn't you recommend it to me yourself? You even told me that you like to use 2 different accounts at work and home." Emily quietly asked me if I hadn't slept well. I was momentarily stunned, thinking back to when I was with Oliver. He said my phone was too old. He gave me a new phone and used my old one as a backup. I suddenly felt a chill in my heart. I hurried back home. When I got home, Oliver was sitting on the sofa, video calling someone. As soon as I walked in the door, he hurriedly hung up the phone. I quickly walked over. I only caught a glimpse of a woman's profile on the screen. Thinking about what happened today, I immediately became furious. I was convinced that Oliver had betrayed me. I don't know why. I suddenly became very irritable. I couldn't listen to Oliver's explanation at all. I even shouted for him to leave. Oliver tried to calm me down, but under my pressure, he stepped back. One step at a time, I slammed the door shut until the knocking outside gradually faded away. I finally slid down against the door, feeling powerless, and cried out loud. Being betrayed by the most trusted subordinate before made me no longer trust others easily. After finally opening my heart again, I gave my true feelings to Oliver, only to have them ruthlessly crushed by him. The phone kept ringing. It was a text message notification. I took a look. It was sent by Oliver. I wiped my nose without hesitation. I added him to the blacklist. In the days that followed, whenever I opened the door, I would always see Oliver squatting at the door. When I stepped outside, Oliver immediately jumped up from the ground. He hurriedly followed behind me, but he could never say the answer I was expecting. Finally, after he nervously explained again that he hadn't done anything, I couldn't help but get angry. I threw the bag in my hand at him. The iron chain on the bag scraped across his face, leaving a trail of blood. But Oliver seemed to not hear it at all. He still stared straight at me. I coldly asked, "Who was that woman that day?" Oliver immediately answered, "She was a doctor." I was a bit suspicious. I asked, "Whose doctor?" This time, Oliver refused to speak no matter what. I stared at him for a long time. My eyes became sore from watching. Tears kept flowing from the corners of my eyes, but Oliver still said nothing. I forced a smile, but the smile seemed very forced. "Oliver, let's break up." I wandered the streets at 1 in the morning with no clear purpose, surrounded by tall buildings. The lights were soft, but not a single light was lit for me. Thinking about Oliver's attitude towards me, I really couldn't help it. I cried out loud in a deserted corner. Suddenly, a teasing voice came from ahead. "Whose girl is crying so sadly?" I looked up and happened to meet 2 pairs of malicious eyes. I was so scared that I took a few steps back. I thought they wanted money. I quickly threw my jewelry and cash over to them, but those 2 still stared at me with that kind of gaze. My heart tightened. Take the chance to escape while they're rummaging through their wallets. But soon they caught up with me. They grabbed my clothes. They looked at me struggling with cold smiles. I cried out for help desperately, but it was silent all around. No one responded. My coat was quickly torn off. I thought I couldn't just sit back and wait for death. I was about to fight back with all my might. Suddenly, the thug pressing down on me was flipped to the ground by someone. The person quickly took off their coat and draped it over me. I smelled a familiar scent. It turned out to be Oliver. Oliver pulled me along. We quickly ran towards the alley entrance, but I had just twisted my ankle. I was running slowly. Before long, we were caught up by the thugs again. Oliver handed me his phone. He blocked the thugs charging at us by himself. I trembled as I dialed the emergency number. Leaning against the information pole, the police quickly found our location. The assailant discovered that I had called the police. He became even more frantic. He pulled out a knife from his pocket and lunged at Oliver. I shouted for Oliver to get away, but 2 people were fighting to stab the knife into his body. Blood immediately spilled everywhere. The sound of police sirens echoed at the alley entrance. The police arrived quickly. They pinned the assailant to the ground. I hurried to Oliver's side. I held him tightly. The blood on him stained my clothes red. I fumbled to apply pressure to his wound, but it was of no use. Oliver raised his hand to try to wipe my tears, but as soon as he lifted his hand, it fell weakly down. He wanted to speak, but as soon as he opened his mouth, it was all blood. By the time we reached the hospital, it was already too late. Oliver's father and mother supported each other as they walked in. The doctor shook his head and said he had done his best. The 2 elderly people knelt down and bowed to the doctor. I begged him not to give up, tears streaming down my face. My legs went weak. I collapsed to the ground. The blood on Oliver's face was particularly striking. I felt completely powerless. I was unwilling to leave Oliver's side for even a moment. I sat on the ground, tightly gripping the hospital bed. No matter what, I refused to let go. Oliver's mother came over. She gently patted my back. Then she held me tightly. Tears kept flowing down. She said, "Sophie, you've been wronged." I thought Oliver had already told his mother about us. My heart was filled with regret. I buried my face in Oliver's mother's arms and cried. Oliver's mother handed me a box of broken cake. The cream was splattered everywhere. This was the birthday gift Oliver had carefully chosen for me. I completely forgot that today was my birthday. I ate it bite by bite. Tears and cream stuck to my face. I crawled over, fell beside Oliver, crying. I said I was wrong. I have never doubted him. But Oliver will never wake up again. He will never gently stroke my head again, gently comforting me. "Sophie, don't cry." After cremating Oliver, I declined the concern from Oliver's dad and mom, returned home alone. The house was filled with traces left by Oliver, but she was already gone. I thought to myself, maybe I can see her in my dreams, so I casually took a few sleeping pills and soon fell into a deep sleep. I didn't dream of Oliver, but when I woke up, I saw that long-lost note again. It said, "Oliver, your phone is unreachable. No replies to messages." Disappearing again. If this continues, I'm really going to get angry. My fingers kept trembling. Did Oliver deceive me all along? I closed my eyes in distress, thinking of honoring the deceased. In the end, I still wrote something on that piece of paper. "Oliver is gone. These are his belongings. You can take them all." I organized Oliver's things. Along with that note, I placed them at the door. Then I drove to Oliver's house. No matter what, Oliver's death is related to me, whether it's due to my guilt towards him or the unspeakable feelings I have in my heart. I took on the responsibility of caring for Oliver's dad and mom. Before this, I knelt on the ground. I detailed the entire incident to Oliver's mom. After listening, Oliver's mom pointed at me with trembling fingers. Then everything went black. I fainted. She slowly regained consciousness. As soon as she saw me, she suddenly slapped me hard. My head was hit, tilting to one side. But I still knelt on the ground without moving. Blood flowed down from the corner of my mouth. I was already prepared to be kicked out by Oliver's mom. Unexpectedly, Oliver's mom suddenly bent down and hugged me. Her tears were very hot. They flowed down my neck and into my clothes. I had just learned that Oliver had cancer. The doctor said he didn't have much time left. There might only be a few months left. He repeatedly urged Oliver's dad and mom to make sure they take good care of me after he leaves. Oliver's mom's voice was a bit shaky. I heard her say this, "As long as you are safe and sound, Oliver is still alive." I opened my mouth and tears fell down. Then I bowed my head forcefully. I was worried that Oliver's mom might do something impulsive due to her emotions, so I let my mom visit Oliver's house more often. Unexpectedly, the two of them got along quite well. Now I felt relieved. I simply followed my mom's suggestion. I bought the house next to Oliver's that was for sale. This way, it's convenient for my mom to visit. I can also come back often to accompany them. Sometimes I go home. My mom always looks at me with hesitation. She asks if I felt any discomfort lately. I feel like my mom is also a bit off. I ignored her. I drove straight home. Recently, there have been a lot of things at the company. I'm often busy until midnight. Sometimes I unknowingly fall asleep at my desk. When I finally managed to finish everything and got home, I unexpectedly found Oliver's things still neatly placed at the door. I frowned. My eyes were filled with confusion. Could it be that the sister discovered Oliver's true nature? I decided not to pay attention to him anymore. I shook my head. I stopped thinking too much. I turned and entered the room. I lay on the bed. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept replaying what had happened earlier. I never realized that Oliver had cancer. He always seemed very cheerful in front of me. He also looked very healthy. He even thoughtfully prepared various health products for me. Every month, he would take me for checkups on time. For every checkup, Oliver personally handled it. He even went to pick up the checkup reports. Then he would carefully review every word and sentence. How could someone who takes such good care of others not take care of himself? My tears flowed down unconsciously. I wiped them away forcefully. "Sophie, you really are useless. He treats you like this. Why are you still feeling sorry for him? I don't remember when I fell asleep." In the morning, a sudden alarm woke me up. I rubbed my head, thinking that I shouldn't have cried in the middle of the night. My head still feels a bit dizzy. As soon as I opened my eyes, I found the photo I had thrown away yesterday on the bedside. I was taken aback for a moment. I quickly opened the bedroom door. I saw Oliver's things neatly arranged in the house again. There were new words on the note as well. Who are you? What are you talking about? Why did you break into my house? And took out all of Oliver's things. If you keep this up, I will call the police. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I quickly wrote down my name and phone number. I sat in my seat and stretched. Suddenly, I noticed a new message popping up on Oliver's phone screen next to me. I couldn't help but click on it. The profile picture was of the woman I had seen before. She said, "The symptoms of your girlfriend that you mentioned last time. We now have a more reliable treatment plan. Find a time to bring her in. But before that, she must not discover your other side." I was stunned for a moment. My fingers tightly gripped the phone. Many images flashed through my mind when Oliver was taking care of me in the hospital. His sleeping appearance. He waited for me to finish work late at night, the scene of him sleeping on the sofa, and the moment he gently put the ring on my finger. I suddenly had a bold idea. There was no time to think more. I hurried back home. Sure enough, the note still had no new replies. I lay in bed, trying to force myself to sleep. But I was too excited. No matter what, I couldn't fall asleep. I simply rummaged through the house, trying to find that old phone to see if I could confirm my thoughts. In the end, I found it in the corner of the storage room. I successfully unlocked the phone with my fingerprint. I opened WeChat. I saw Oliver's name at the top. After scrolling down for a while, I found the chat history that was exactly the same as Emily's phone. My hands were shaking. I added myself to her friend list. I wrote a long self-introduction. Then I placed it along with the note on the nightstand. Of course, I also didn't forget to bring back all of Oliver's things. I took 2 sleeping pills. I forced myself to sleep. When I woke up again, I found new content written on the note. "You said you are Sophie. Then who am I?" I was silent for a while, but I really didn't know how to respond. I had no choice but to tell her in detail what had happened to me during this time over the phone. I thought about how my mom had been acting strangely lately. I decided to go find her and ask for clarity. Just as I arrived at Oliver's house, I found the front door tightly shut. I had to call my mom. She said she took Oliver's mom away for a trip to relax. They won't be back for a while. I helplessly turned around and walked back. I didn't notice that the door to Oliver's house had quietly opened a crack behind me. Along the way, many fragments of memories that didn't belong to me suddenly flooded into my mind. I'm happily bouncing around Oliver. Ask him, "Oliver, this hot pot tastes really good. How did you find this place?" Oliver turned his head to look at me. He smiled and said, "I came here with my colleagues before. I remember our Sophie loves spicy food the most. Oliver, the rings you made are really beautiful. I will wear them forever." Oliver gently patted my head. He said, "Of course." I then asked him, "Oliver, what birthday wish do you have today? Tell me. I'll help you make it come true." Oliver gently blew out the candles. He silently wished, "For my Sophie, may everything go smoothly and perfectly." Tears couldn't stop flowing down if it was always me. Why didn't Oliver tell me? I stumbled back home in a daze. I can't sleep properly. I can only take sleeping pills in large amounts. Finally, I saw that blurry figure in my dream. We spoke at the same time. "It's you." We looked at each other after a while. I slowly saw her face clearly. My eyes reflected a face that looked exactly like mine. She spoke first. "I saw the message you sent me." After she finished speaking, I pieced together that incomplete story in my mind. Looking back, that day I watched the surging river water. I had an impulse to jump in. It was Oliver who pulled me back. He rushed back from abroad. He saved my life. Oliver is my childhood friend. I had no idea he liked me before. He took out all his savings to help me pay off my debts. At that time, I was deep in severe depression. Oliver stayed by my side. He guided me day and night. He took care of me meticulously. I'm slowly emerging from the shadows. Later, Oliver and I naturally got together. I've known Oliver for a long time. He knows all my little habits very well. He knows that my favorite dish is the squirrel fish. Every holiday, he always prepares some little surprises to make me happy. Once at 3 in the morning, I gently woke him up. I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Oliver, I want to see the sunrise." Oliver didn't find it strange. He got dressed, took the car keys, and took me to the highest peak when the orange sun just peeked over the horizon. I excitedly shouted, "Sophie wants to be with Oliver forever." I turned to look at Oliver. He only said one sentence, "I hope my Sophie, everything goes smoothly." From childhood to adulthood, his wishes always revolve around me. The days spent with Oliver are very happy. The only regret is that he often goes on business trips. but I find that I don't quite remember what I was doing when Oliver was away on business. That day, I said I wanted to go to the hospital for a checkup. Oliver's expression changed a bit. He said he would accompany me. He also went to get the checkup results. The report stated that the main cause was insufficient sleep due to work stress. I was a bit mentally exhausted. Oliver advised me to rest well. I smiled and agreed with him. I even comforted him that it was nothing serious. On the day of our second anniversary together, we went to customize a pair of couple rings. We personally put them on each other's ring fingers. I said, "Oliver, let's get married." Oliver's eyes were filled with tears. He smiled and agreed with me. Later, when I went to the company to find him, I accidentally found a cancer test report in his drawer. My hands kept shaking. Oliver brought me some juice. When I saw the test results in my hand, his smile suddenly vanished. Oliver was worried something went wrong. He took me back home. I cried heavily in his arms. He comforted me with a smile, saying it was nothing serious. I looked up and bumped into Oliver's chin. Then, because I was too anxious, I suddenly fainted. I don't know how long I slept. When I woke up, I saw through the operating room glass. Oliver was lying on the hospital bed, covered in blood. Beside him, his parents were praying continuously. I staggered over. I pressed against the glass and shouted Oliver's name desperately. People around were watching me. I can't remember what happened afterward. I only felt the time I was awake getting shorter. I could only write what I wanted to say on a note. I hope Oliver can see it. I listened to her recounting everything. That was all the life experiences I had forgotten before. In the end, she asked me with a hint of anticipation, "Where did Oliver go?" I covered my face with my hands. My body trembled slightly. The emotions I had been holding back these days suddenly surged up. I was completely overwhelmed. Oliver passed away. He left because of my doubts on that night when he desperately protected me. He never woke up again. She stood there in a daze, whispering to herself, "Dead." I didn't want to see her looking so dejected anymore, so I tried hard to wake up from the dream. But her voice still echoed in my ears. "Go find Mom. She must know something." When I went there, my mom was chatting with Oliver's mom. They were deep in conversation. I suppressed my anger and walked up quickly. I simply greeted Oliver's mom, then she pulled my mom away. My mom followed me home, confused. That's when I finally asked her, "You already knew Oliver's mom, right?" My mom's expression suddenly turned tense. My nails dug into my palm. There was a metallic taste in my mouth. "You all have been treating me like a fool until now," Oliver's mom said from behind me. "Sophie, don't blame your mom. It was Oliver who made us do this." I widened my eyes in surprise. My mom's voice echoed in my ears. "Actually, your depression hasn't improved, Sophie. Haven't you noticed how easily you faint and feel drowsy? And how irritable you are?" My tears kept flowing down my face. "But why didn't you all tell me?" Oliver's mom shouted excitedly. "Because from the very beginning, the doctor advised us not to tell you about your condition." Oliver's mother finally couldn't control her suppressed emotions any longer. She cried uncontrollably. I took the crumpled diagnosis report from my mother's hands. Suddenly, it came to my mind. That was the day Oliver accompanied her for a checkup. The diagnosis showed the patient may have schizophrenia. There can be unstable states between the two personalities. It may be triggered by multiple factors. It is advised not to tell the patient directly, to avoid uncontrollable consequences. It is best to take a conservative approach to treatment. I painfully closed my eyes. It turns out Oliver would rather die than reveal this secret. A sudden situation that even the doctor didn't understand. Oliver didn't dare to take any risks at all. In the end, it was Oliver's mother who took me to see the doctor. Under the doctor's careful treatment, I gradually regained my health. Everything is developing in the direction Oliver hoped for. Unfortunately, he can no longer see it all. I often linger by the river. I walk through that alley repeatedly, recalling all the moments spent with Oliver. He traveled thousands of miles across the ocean to save me, leading me toward a new life. He even stayed behind in that cold place for me. I'm trying hard to live well. I specifically quit my job. I spend all my time with my parents and Oliver's parents. I know my health is getting worse. I see the growing concern in their eyes. I always downplay it. That day, I went to see Oliver with his mom. He still looks so happy in the photos. I quietly told Oliver's mom that I wanted to stay a little longer. Oliver's mom didn't want to see these sad scenes anymore. She nodded and left the cemetery. I sat down, gently touching Oliver's face with my fingers. My heart is filled with reluctance and nostalgia as I was about to lose consciousness. I only saw a fiery red sunrise. Oliver whispered softly in my ear, I hope for my Sophie. Everything goes smoothly. May all wishes come true.